So you're thinking about buying a Joolz. Why? Is it because of its non-toxic, organic, and recyclable qualities? Or maybe because they'll plant a tree in Colombia in your baby's name when you register your lifetime guarantee? Is it even about the stroller itself? Joolz, of course, isn't the only stroller brand to use cultural identity to sell its products. Many of the top brands do this in one way or another. After all, it's quite a powerful tool for claiming space in the market. And it also acts as a justification for a higher price tag. Because you're not just buying the stroller, right? You're showing that you can afford to plant a tree in Colombia. Just to warn you, this review isn't going to have anything to do with any of that. We're going to talk use and mechanics, and mostly mechanics. So what to make of the Joolz Geo 2? I have to admit, I've been overlooking them for a while now. Not because of their marketing gimmicks, but rather that, in addition to looking sort of funky and subpar terrain-wise, I honestly just didn't really like the name, stupid as that sounds. Joolz, spelled with a Z. I have 2 boys, and to me the name just sounds like something for those all-pink aisles in toy stores that we'd avoid. Having now had a closer look though, I'm a little confused as to where exactly to place the stroller. Mechanism by mechanism, the Geo 2 is clearly constructed according to the design principles I respect most as a stroller repairman. Simplicity, quality materials, meaning lots of metal, and a lot of inbuilt protection against known problems. They're obviously done their homework. And even though there are some things I dislike, there's a lot more that I love, that in some cases are simply genius innovations. It's a darn sturdy stroller. The problem is that they've made a variety of pretty major choices to make sure that that sturdiness will never be used to its full potential. If that sounds confusing, don't worry. You'll understand by the end of this. Okay, before we get started, I'm going to do what I usually do and give some of the basic statistics on the stroller. So when you fold it down, it's going to measure 60 by 42 by 97 centimeters. Its weight is 12 kilos if you count the chassis and the seat, or 13 kilos for the chassis and the bag. The weight capacity of the shopping basket underneath is 10 kilos. That's quite high. Again, with the weight that the seat can take, it's advertised as 15 kilos, but I happen to know that that has to do with EU regulations on what they can claim to take in the seat. I have seen a statistic that the total weight capacity of the Joolz is 40 kilos together. So if you were to put 10 in the shopping basket, that would mean 30 in the seat. That seems high to me. It's safe to assume that the seat is going to take the weight until you're done using the stroller. Okay, we'll start with a few notes on comfort, both for you and your child. The bassinet is currently on the stroller. The bassinet is of quite a large size, which is nice. It does have a little bit less sun coverage than a lot of other strollers these days, but it is kind of acceptable. One little nice thing that I noted that I haven't actually seen before is that there's a false wall here at the back, so there's space between the actual bassinet and the external wall, which keeps your child from waking up if you happen to bump that front end into something. The bumper bar, or in the case of the bassinet, the handle, does only pull upwards and fold this way. It does not actually hinge back and forth, so that's a little bit of a minus on it. Overall though, we're quite pleased with the bassinet, simply because it is large and it does have a few features that kind of make it a little bit more luxurious and safe. Okay, switching for the seat, I'd say right off the bat that I feel it's a little bit short for footroom. Not overly so, but sort of middle of the road as far as the market goes. The seat recline mechanism is kept with a simplicity theme, using the old Boogaboo Chameleon design of 2 buttons. This system is less complex and thus less breakable than the more common one-hand adjustment handle that most brands go for these days. I'm not sure what I think about this though. This might be one of the few areas where comfort might win out in my opinion, but it's not a big thing. And again, it is potentially more problem-free. As far as your own comfort with the stroller is concerned, the folding is quite easy. There are 2 easy buttons here for adjusting the height of the handle, and then 2 easy clips here in order to fold the stroller down. The size of the stroller folded is pretty standard, and the weight is a little on the heavy side if you think of this as a mid-size stroller, which the size of the wheels would suggest, but right in line with the heavyweight class. How comfortable the weight is for you is going to depend a lot on how you plan to use the stroller, how much folding and carrying is necessary in your daily life. Maintenance-wise, the stroller is very easy. It doesn't have air-filled tires or brake wires to pump or adjust. A little lubrication here and there is always a good idea, but you don't need to do much more beyond that. Switching from the seat to the bag and just removing the textiles in general is extremely easy. Definitely one of the easiest, if not the easiest system on the market. The trade-off for this, of course, is zippers, and zippers do break over time, so you might want to keep a hold of those papers for your lifetime warranty. Now we get to one of the truly genius innovations on the stroller. A large, easily removable shopping basket with handles and 10 kilos capacity. What this means in practice is if you're taking a day trip somewhere and you pack a picnic or towels to go swimming or whatever else it might be, you can park and just slide out the basket to access your stuff instead of bending down and rummaging beneath the seat or bassinet and jostling around a baby that might be sleeping. If this is your first baby, you might not understand that, but it is genius. And I believe that it's going to be copied in the future by other manufacturers. The last category of comfort I'd like to touch on is drivability. How comfortable this stroller is to drive, which is really, in my opinion, the real downside of this stroller. I'll get into this a lot more while going over the mechanics of the stroller, but in short, the small wheel size and poor suspension really limit where the stroller can be driven comfortably to streets and light terrain, like cobblestones, dirt roads, and manicured parks. For the weight of the stroller, this is just sort of suboptimal. But when considering the serious strength of a lot of the engineering choices, this becomes a real tragedy. Okay, we're going to talk mechanics now. So a couple notes on the seat frame. Firstly, the hinges on the canopy here, as well as the hinges here on the back side of the shopping basket, are built with a little bit of an unfortunate design. And the reason for that is there's no button to activate that hinge, and it operates in a very common way where you have a rivet that runs through two like gear teeth type panels, and with a spring inside so that it's spring loaded. What happens over time when you have a rivet here instead of a screw and you don't have a button to help lock it into place, although even with a button this happens sometimes, is that when that rivet starts to loosen, this hinge will no longer hold as tight in different positions. It's a little bit less of an issue with the shopping basket, but when it comes to things like canopies and you have this sort of setup where it's supposed to snap into various positions, what happens when that hinge starts to loosen is that the canopy will fall down when you don't want it to. I'm hoping that won't be a problem, but that is what that mechanism indicates to me after several years of experience, of course, fixing strollers. The second thing that I have a little bit of a concern with on the frame is the fact that there's no crossbar for these feet. So both of these feet are independent of each other as they snap down into the frame, and of course they're meant to hold symmetrical positions. Usually this won't be a problem because they'll be in symmetrical positions when you take off the seat, and thus the same when you put it back on. But it does mean that you can sometimes access one foot or connect one foot into the chassis and the other one won't quite connect, and you can wind up having accidents with this sort of situation. And also it just can be a little bit fiddly if, of course, the feet are not in the correct alignment as you're trying to fit the seat onto the frame. Okay, we'll set aside the seat then and have a look at the chassis. Starting at the top, the handle telescopic mechanism is quite well built. So they obviously know that there are problems when you have internal cords or wires that activate mechanisms, and they put a pretty sturdy construction onto this. It has this large metal dial on both sides. You flip down, and the cord inside is a little bit larger than average, and it's mostly metal pieces, pretty much all metal pieces on the inside with how these systems work. The handle did come right out of the box. This is a brand new stroller, a little bit loose, but I don't really see these connection points widening up that much more unless there's some kind of accident and they break. So for me, it's not a problem to have a little bit of looseness there. That is something you might want to be aware of yourself. The folding mechanism on this stroller is quite cleverly built from the point of view of limiting complex mechanisms and maximizing strong materials, with only one real weak point as far as I can see. So all the magic happens right down here in the front, and there's quite a lot of metal. All the other points are actually hinges. I'm going to fold it a little bit and show you. The whole thing connects together right down here, and again, all of the parts, the moving parts in that, are based on metal. Everything else on the stroller that moves is just a hinge. And what's nice about this is that a lot of strollers have separate locking points along their chassis when you're folding down a stroller. And every time you have a locking point, it's like a complex internal mechanism that can actually break. In this case, of course, then, there's just hinges. Hinges are very simple mechanisms. And there's only one locking point to deal with if anything goes wrong, and that locking point is made as solidly as possible. Now there is, as I said, one major weak point, and I would say that that is right here on the back side of the chassis. And part of the reason for this is that the handle angles kind of upwards in a nice way for hefting the stroller up over curbs. And when you combine that with the fact that there's not any real suspension in the stroller, you're going to wind up putting a lot of pressure onto these two rivets. Now luckily, the way this whole setup is designed with this kind of narrow facing and long plastic plates, you're probably not going to get a lot of horizontal looseness when this rivet starts to loosen. It'll be more of a vertical sort of a problem, but you never know. 4 or 5 years down the line, if this point starts to loosen, these discs start to loosen, and the only point of locking on the stroller is in the front end here, you could have problems. On the other hand, again, this whole design is built so that you can avoid complex mechanisms, and if there is a problem, it'll probably be a little bit easier to fix. The folding lock here also keeps with this simplicity of design. So this is an older sort of lock that has been used on a lot of strollers in the past, but not usually strollers that are this heavy with front swivel wheels. A lot of strollers actually have a system whereby you actually have to depress the locking and unlocking mechanisms in order to fold or unfold your stroller. And just using something simple like this, again, helps to prevent complex mechanisms on the stroller that can go wrong and create problems for you in the future. Now, this sort of a setup does break from time to time, but it's, again, not the hardest thing to switch out if it does have problems. Okay, we'll move on to looking at the lower back portion of the stroller in order to have a look at a few things. Firstly, the brakes follow kind of a simple, sturdy design. It just flips on and off. There's not really any internal wires. Because of the design of the wheels, in addition, it doesn't even contain pins that extend out from the lower portion of the chassis. And when you take this with the wheels, it's sort of another area where Joolz has clearly done their homework and researched what the common problems are with stroller brake systems, and then kind of work their engineering around in order to fix them. The wheels are ingenious. I love both the back wheels and the front wheels on the Joolz. I'll show you. So, if you have a look at this wheel, it looks like a very strange sort of a system. And the reason for that is that this axle, which holds the wheel to the stroller itself, is not the same axle that the wheel, of course, revolves around. And it is the whole revolution system is independent of the stroller itself. What this means is that they can make the connection point between here and the wheel itself really, really tight using like wave washers or various sorts of like pressure as they tighten this up. And because it's not going to have to lock and unlock from the stroller, it can be kept in that kind of very tight environment. Now, the same thing has actually been done with the brakes. The whole brake system in relation to how the wheel locks is contained also within this extra disc and the wheel itself. When you press the brake pedal, it simply pushes in on the inside of this axle, and that pushes a peg into holes on the inside of the wheel. But if anything goes wrong with the brake system, you can of course just replace out the entire wheel setup. And now remember, again, you have a lifetime guarantee on this stroller, provided that they honor it, of course. And so it would be a lot easier to deal with any sort of problems then, both with the brake system, the wheels locking on the stroller, and also any sort of like rotational problems, ball bearings and so on, than it might be with a lot of other brands. A couple things I do dislike though about the back end of the stroller, again with the wheels, is the foam. So while I love the wheel in the sense of how it connects to the stroller, the foam they've chosen for both the back and the front wheels is of a bit softer and kind of an older quality or type than is coming into vogue in the market, where they're starting to use like real rubber. The reason is that this older sort of softer foam, after a while it gets worn down and can get quite full of pebbles and kind of look ugly. The other thing is that there's no real dedicated suspension built into the chassis. They claim that there's sort of an independent suspension on all four wheels, but in my experience this is usually just an excuse for lack of building a stroller with any real focus on shock absorption. At least nothing that can handle any real terrain. Remember that this is combined with foam tires instead of air-filled ones, and while it's nice not to have to pump flat tires and so on, that's also going to limit its terrain drivability. Okay, looking at the front end, the first thing I'm struck with again is certain elements of this front end that are going to impact the drivability of the stroller on terrain. Most notably the 8-inch front wheels, that's just really dumb. They could have gone for at least 10-inch front wheels, and that would have done quite a lot for this stroller. The other thing about terrain and drivability is that the front end is relatively low, and it protrudes out pretty far with this sort of handle assembly here, which is not a problem for most terrain, but if you live somewhere where it's cold and snows, you know, snow can very quickly get up pretty high, and you have kind of a pretty enclosed fork system here where snow can get caught inside, and as the snow gets even higher, of course this whole thing's just going to act like a plow or a shovel and can get quite easily stuck in snowbanks. So that's a little bit of a problem. Beyond that, I really like a lot of the designs with the front wheels. Most importantly, again, the way they lock to the stroller, as with the back end. I think that's really, really intelligent. So what happens here is that if you look at the axle on the front, it's like a tube made of metal. And there's a second axle that's going to lock into the center. And this axle also fits into a channel around the axle here. So what you wind up getting with that is that it's being held both inside this axle
and from the outside inside the housing mechanism. That is a very good inbuilt protection against what they call wobbly wheel problems, which is where the axle and the axle tends to widen out the housing on the front end, and thus it wobbles when it goes too fast. I would guess that this sort of a solution will mean that you're pretty much never going to have those kind of problems. I mean, I can't speak for this stroller 7 to 8 years down the line, but it is a really, really intelligent solution towards protecting the connection point between the front wheels and the chassis. When it comes to the swivel lock itself, you activate that with an on-off system here. A peg goes down into the top of the front wheel here. And one thing I've noticed, just a little nice attention to detail, is that they've made this well for that peg metal. So that means you're not going to get the problem where that peg starts to erode and widen out the plastic that you get on a lot of similar strollers or strollers with similar sort of setups for their front wheel lock. Now, by contrast, having an on-off system for your front wheel swivel lock is not that intelligent in my opinion, and not a mark of simplicity. So I don't know, maybe they had a different guy engineering the front end than they did with a lot of the rest of the chassis. The problem with the on-off system is that if you get any sort of grit and pebbles and sand in here, it can sort of deform the plastic, scratch it and so on, and make it so that eventually, over time, you can have trouble activating that on and off. The button won't pop up as it should and so on. So, I mean, I can't say it definitely will happen, but it does happen in similar circumstances, like with the Upper Baby Vista, for example. There's a little bit of suspension in the front end. That's what you'd expect with this sort of fork setup. Usually, manufacturers put a little bit of suspension into the build of the fork, but again, it's not much. And with those 8-inch front wheels, you're not really going to be driving off-road much anyway, as we've said.
So then, is the Joolz Geo 2 right for you? Well, it's strange, because the Geo 2 seems to follow a sort of inverse product conception to a lot of other brands. The design is very conservative. What I mean by this is that most of the time, terrain capability exceeds structural integrity. There are a lot of strollers out there that shake themselves to pieces because the designs themselves, with big wheels and big suspension, suggest that one should drive these strollers in a very carefree manner. And then what often happens is that the structural integrity of the chassis is too weak for this suggested mode of driving, and all the weak points start to come to the surface. If it's a good brand, then these weak points are then handled in future models of the same stroller. With the Geo 2 though, we have an entirely different animal, one that I suspect will last a long time. With in particular the 8-inch front wheels, but also the lack of suspension, you really can't take this stroller that far off-road. But at the same time, with such a solid design, in particular as regards to the connection points to the wheels, you're really unlikely to wear this stroller down on smoother terrain. Really, it's a perfect combination for offering a lifetime guarantee, though I really do hope they use some of these design ideas in an actual terrain-capable stroller in the future. I would say that you should consider the Joolz if you live in an urban or suburban environment, but not a rural environment. Preferably if you use your stroller with public transport where you don't need to heft it in and out of a car that often, or actually just tend to walk with your stroller. Despite its strange look and kooky name, under conditions of lighter terrain, this is a very robust stroller, and I look forward to seeing what this company has planned for the future. I hope this video has been interesting for you to watch, and if it has been, we ask you to subscribe, as it helps us to continue making videos in the future. Thank you.